The polished marble floor of Sterling Industries headquarters gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, reflecting the chaos that was my morning. Arthur Sterling, my boss, stood before me, his face a mask of pure fury. His voice boomed, echoing through the cavernous lobby, each word a sharp jab meant to wound. "Vance, what in God's name is this mess?" He gestured wildly at a stack of papers on my desk, papers I'd spent all night organizing. "This is Sterling Industries, not some kindergarten craft project. I expected competence, not this amateur hour garbage." My stomach twisted. Around us, people pretended not to notice, their eyes darting away, their footsteps quickening. It was always like this. He loved an audience for his public floggings. I just stood there, my hands clenched at my sides, my breath catching in my throat. I was Eleanor Vance, and for the past 5 years, I'd been nothing more than a glorified secretary, a punching bag for his ego. "Sir, I double-checked everything," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Double-checked? You call this checking? This is an embarrassment, Vance. An absolute disgrace to the Sterling name. You're costing this company money, time, and frankly, my patience." He leaned in, his breath hot and sour on my face. "If you can't handle this simple job, maybe you should find one you do. Like fetching coffee. Or polishing my shoes." A wave of heat washed over me, not of shame, but of something far more potent. Rage. It simmered beneath the surface, a slow burn that had been building for years. He thought he had me broken, defeated. He saw a meek assistant. He didn't see the storm brewing behind my eyes. He didn't see the meticulously crafted plan that was about to unfold. This humiliation, this public spectacle, it wasn't breaking me. It was forging me. It was the final spark I needed. Tonight I would start planning his downfall. Tonight the real work began. The city hummed its usual late-night tune outside the expansive windows of Marcus's loft. Brooklyn. It felt a million miles away from the sterile, suffocating halls of Sterling Industries. And that was exactly the point. The space was all exposed brick and reclaimed wood, a stark contrast to the polished chrome and glass Arthur Sterling favored. It was a sanctuary, a place where the air didn't feel thick with unspoken threats and forced smiles. Marcus was hunched over his laptop, the glow of the screen casting sharp shadows on his face. He'd always been a wizard with anything digital, a skill I'd discovered early on, a secret weapon in my arsenal. He looked up as I entered, a flicker of relief crossing his features. He was one of the few people who saw past the meek assistant act, who knew the fire that burned beneath. "You're late," he said. His voice a low rumble, not accusatory, just stating a fact. "Arthur," I sighed, sinking onto the worn leather sofa. He decided to make an example of me. Again. This time it was about some report. Apparently my competence is an insult to his legacy. I mimicked his pompous tone, the bitterness still raw. Marcus shut the laptop, his gaze steady. "He's getting bolder. He knows you're close to something, even if he doesn't know what." "He knows is off," I corrected, pulling my knees to my chest. "He just can't fathom that the girl he's been kicking around for 5 years is the one who's going to bring him down." I ran a hand through my hair, the frustration of the day still clinging to me. "It's the way he talks to me, Marcus. Like I'm less than dirt. The public humiliation. It's not just about the job. It's personal. He's a monster, and he genuinely believes he's untouchable." I remembered the way his breath had reeked of stale coffee and entitlement, the sneer on his face as he suggested I go back to fetching coffee. It wasn't just about the papers on my desk. It was about chipping away at my spirit day by day. And for years he'd succeeded. I'd swallowed the insults, bitten my tongue until it bled, all while meticulously gathering evidence, building this elaborate trap. "I know," Marcus said softly, moving to sit beside me. He didn't touch me, but his presence was a solid anchor. "But he's not. And we're getting closer." He gestured to a tablet on the coffee table. I've been digging into the offshore accounts. It's even messier than we thought. He's been moving money around like a phantom for years. Laundering, I'm pretty sure. The shell corporations are a nightmare to untangle, but I'm making progress. He tapped the screen, bringing up a complex web of financial data. Charts and figures I barely understood, but Marcus translated them into plain English. He explained how Arthur was siphoning funds, hiding assets, all while projecting an image of a financial genius. It was a sick kind of irony. This latest intel from Brenda, he continued, pointing to a specific section. It confirms a transfer scheduled for next week. Big one. If we can intercept that, or at least get proof of it before it happens, it'll be the nail in his coffin. Brenda, Arthur's secretary. A woman trapped in a gilded cage, just like me, though her motivations were different. Fear mostly. But she'd started feeding us scraps, little breadcrumbs of information that, when pieced together, painted a damning picture. She's risking a lot, I murmured, thinking of Brenda's weary eyes, the way she'd flinched every time Arthur raised his voice. We all are, Marcus said, his gaze hardening. But this is it, Eleanor. This is the piece that connects everything. This transfer, it's too large to hide, too obvious. He's getting sloppy. He thinks he's won. I leaned back, the anger from the office slowly giving way to a cold, calculated resolve. The humiliation Arthur had dished out today wasn't a setback. It was fuel. It was a reminder of why I was doing this, of what was at stake. My family's legacy, my own dignity, and the satisfaction of watching a bully finally get what he deserved. He's not won, I said, my voice low and steady. He's just dug his own grave a little deeper. I looked at Marcus, a grim smile touching my lips. Let's get to work. We spent the next few hours dissecting the data, mapping out the next steps. The loft, with its quiet hum and focused intensity, felt like the command center of a revolution. Outside, the city slept, oblivious to the storm that was brewing, a storm I was determined to unleash upon Arthur Sterling. The city's pulse thrummed outside the tinted windows of the Gilded Lily. It was a place where deals were sealed with champagne toasts and reputations were built or shattered over tiny, overpriced appetizers. Arthur Sterling loved events like this. He thrived on the attention, the sycophantic smiles, the illusion of power he projected so effortlessly. Tonight was no different. He was the king of his castle, holding court amidst the clinking glasses and hushed conversations. I was there, of course, not as a guest, but as part of the background noise, a shadow in a sensible dress, blending into the opulent decor. It was the perfect vantage point. Arthur was so busy playing the magnate. He barely registered the people who weren't directly in his spotlight. That's how I liked it. Gave me room to breathe, to observe, to work. My eyes scanned the room, taking in the faces. The usual suspects. Investors, potential clients, board members. David was there, holding court near the champagne fountain. His usual stoic expression firmly in place. He was a man who valued stability, who had seen Arthur rise and had benefited from it, but I knew he wasn't blind. He was smart enough to see through some of Arthur's smoke and mirrors, even if he played along. This was my chance. I'd spent the last few days, since that humiliating scene in the lobby, meticulously crafting my approach. It wasn't about outright accusations. That would get me nowhere. It was about planting seeds, subtle whispers of doubt that would fester and grow. I waited for a lull, for David to finish a conversation. Then I drifted closer, feigning a casual interest in a nearby art piece. As he turned, I caught his eye. Polite, almost shy smile. Mr. Chen, I said, my voice soft, barely audible above the din. He nodded, a polite acknowledgement. Eleanor, isn't it? From Arthur's office. Yes, sir, I replied, keeping my gaze steady but not overly direct. Just admiring the ambience. I gestured vaguely with my hand. He gave a slight smile. It's quite the production, isn't it? Arthur always does things in a big way. This was it. The opening. He certainly does. I agreed, letting a hint of something, weariness, disillusionment, creep into my tone. It's a lot to keep up with for everyone, especially with the recent. If David's eyebrows flickered. He'd heard something. Shifts, he prompted, his tone casual, but his eyes sharper now. I lowered my voice further, leaning in just a fraction. Just the pace, sir. In the direction. Sometimes, I wonder if we're all truly on the same page with where we're headed. If the vision is as clear as it needs to be for a company this size. I kept it vague, non-committal. I wasn't questioning Arthur's genius. Not directly. I was questioning the of his vision, the of the team. It sounded like a concerned employee, not a saboteur. He studied me for a moment, a long, appraising look. I could feel his mind working, sifting through my words, trying to place them. He'd always been a sharp one. The market's tough, he said finally, his voice thoughtful. Always has been. Arthur's got a good handle on it, though. Always has. Of course, sir, I said quickly, a little too quickly. It's just. Sometimes, with all the grand gestures, I worry the fundamentals might get overlooked. The solid groundwork that got us here in the first place. I let my gaze drift towards Arthur, who was laughing boisterously at something one of his sycophants had said. I let my expression convey a subtle, almost imperceptible hint of concern, a shadow of doubt. David followed my gaze. He didn't say anything, but I saw it, a flicker of something in his eyes. Question. Seed planted. He gave a curt nod, his mind clearly elsewhere now, replaying my words, connecting them to other whispers, other observations. Indeed, he murmured, his gaze distant. Well, Eleanor, good to see you. He turned away, his attention already drifting back to the swirling crowd, but his posture was different, more pensive. I retreated, melting back into the periphery. It was a small step, barely a ripple in the grand scheme of things. But Arthur Sterling's carefully constructed world was built on perception. And tonight I just chipped away at the foundation, ever so slightly. The gala was just the beginning. The drive out to Long Island felt like a trip back in time. The city's grit faded, replaced by manicured lawns and the kind of quiet that screams old money. The Vance estate. It was less a house, more a sprawling monument to my family's history, a place I hadn't set foot in for years. Since. Well, not since Arthur's influence started creeping into every corner of my life, even the parts he didn't officially touch. Pulling up the long, winding driveway, the familiar grandeur hit me like a punch to the gut. The stone facade, the ivy creeping up the walls, the sheer scale of it all. It was beautiful, suffocatingly so. It was also empty. My parents were gone, and the house had been sitting mostly dormant, cared for by a skeleton crew of groundskeepers and a housekeeper who only came in for deep cleans. It felt like a museum of my childhood, filled with ghosts and memories I usually kept locked away. Today, though, I needed one specific ghost. The heavy oak door creaked open, a sound I remembered from countless childhood afternoons spent hiding from my father's stern gaze. The air inside was cool, tinged with a scent of lemon polish and something faintly floral, like dried potpourri. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight piercing the tall, arched windows. I walked through the cavernous foyer, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Every object, every piece of furniture, was a silent witness to a life that felt both mine and utterly foreign. My target was the study. It was my father's domain, a room lined with books that smelled of aged paper and leather. But it was also where my mother kept her personal effects, tucked away in a small antique desk. That's where it would be. The desk was exactly as I remembered it. Dark mahogany, intricately carved. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood, a shiver tracing its way down my spine. This was where she'd sat, her elegant hands sorting through papers, her gentle smile always ready. It was hard to reconcile the woman I remembered with the cold, hard facts of what had happened. Arthur's greed had a way of poisoning everything. Open the top drawer. Nothing but old stationery and a few forgotten pens. The second drawer yielded a small collection of silver letter openers. Still no sign of it. A knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. What if it wasn't here? What if, in his relentless pursuit of control, Arthur had somehow managed to get his hands on it, even years ago? Taking a deep breath, I opened the bottom drawer. It was deeper than the others, a false bottom perhaps. My fingers fumbled for a latch, a seam, anything. A tiny indentation, almost invisible. Pressed it. With a soft click, a section of the drawer slid back, revealing a hidden compartment. And there it was. Nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay my mother's antique silver locket. It was simple, oval-shaped, engraved with a delicate floral pattern. It wasn't ostentatious, not like the gaudy jewelry Arthur's cronies flaunted, but it held more value than all of it combined. It was a piece of my mother, a tangible link to the legacy Arthur was trying to erase. Picked it up. The cool metal felt familiar in my palm. It was heavier than I remembered, or maybe it was just the weight of what it represented. This wasn't just jewelry. It was a symbol of the Vance name, of the power and influence Arthur had so carelessly stolen. It was a reminder of who I was and who he was not. Clutching the locket tight, I closed the hidden compartment and then the drawer. The silence of the house seemed to press in on me, but it was no longer suffocating. Felt expectant. Like the house itself was waiting for me to reclaim my birthright. Leaving the study, I glanced around the foyer one last time. The grandeur was still there, but now it felt less like a burden and more like a promise. I had the reminder I needed. The fight was far from over, but holding this piece of my past, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Arthur Sterling thought he could bury the Vance legacy. Bury me with it. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The drive back from the Vance estate was a blur of adrenaline and a gnawing sense of urgency. The weight of the locket in my pocket was a constant reminder of what was at stake, but it was also a heavy burden. I needed more. Not just sentiment but hard, undeniable proof. Arthur's empire was built on a foundation of smoke and mirrors, and I knew deep down that there were cracks. I just needed to find them. That's where Marcus came in. His loft apartment in Brooklyn was a world away from the polished halls of Sterling Industries, a sanctuary of controlled chaos and blinking lights. It smelled of stale coffee and ozone, a comforting scent that always signaled we were on the right track. He was hunched over his glowing monitors, his brow furrowed in concentration, the picture of a digital warrior. "Anything?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, not wanting to break his focus. He didn't look up, just grunted, a sound that could mean anything from "almost there" to "this is impossible." I poured myself a glass of water, the ice clinking loudly in the quiet space. The locket felt warm against my hip. "He's good," Marcus finally said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Arthur's not stupid. He's got layers of security on his personal cloud. Like Fort Knox but with more algorithms." I leaned against the doorframe, watching him. I trusted Marcus implicitly. He was the only one who knew the full extent of my plan, the only one who understood the depth of the years of humiliation I'd endured. He'd been there, quietly watching, offering support when I needed it most, and now he was my digital key. "But," prompted. He let out a short, sharp laugh. "But good isn't unbeatable. Especially when you've got someone who knows his habits, his predictable patterns. He likes to keep everything neat, categorized. Even his dirty laundry." My stomach tightened. This was it. The moment of truth. I'd given Marcus everything I could remember about Arthur's digital life. His preferred usernames, his old passwords, even the names of his childhood pets. It felt like a violation, digging into someone's private life like this, but Arthur had left me no choice. He'd made my life a living hell for 5 years. This was just leveling the playing field. Marcus's eyes narrowed. His gaze fixed on a complex string of code scrolling down one of the screens. He typed a final command, and then a single word appeared, stark and bold. "Access granted." A wave of relief, so potent it made my knees weak, washed over me. He'd done it. He'd gotten in. "Whoa," Marcus breathed, leaning back in his chair, running a hand through his already messy hair. "This is a gold mine, Eleanor. Financial statements, offshore account details, private correspondence. It's all here, and it's a mess." He started pulling up files, his voice filled with a mixture of triumph and disgust. "Look at this. He's been siphoning funds from the R&D budget for years, straight into shell corporations. And these emails. He's been talking trash about pretty much everyone, including his own board members. Including David." I walked over to his desk, my eyes scanning the glowing screen. The numbers swam before me, but the implications were clear. This was more than just financial fraud. This was a betrayal of trust on a massive scale. Arthur had built his reputation on integrity, on being a shrewd but honest businessman. This data painted a completely different picture. "And this," Marcus said, clicking on a folder labeled Personal. "This is the real dirt. Private messages, recorded conversations. Things he wouldn't want anyone, especially Victoria, to ever see." He opened a file, and a synthesized voice, unmistakably Arthur's, filled the small apartment. It was a conversation, hushed and venomous, detailing a plan to manipulate a rival company, a plan that would have devastating consequences for thousands of employees. The sheer ruthlessness of it sent a chill down my spine. "He's a monster," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "He is. And we've got him. This is it, Eleanor. This is the proof we need." He saved everything onto an encrypted USB drive, the small device feeling like a powerful weapon in his hand. The weight of what we had just uncovered settled over me. The path ahead was still dangerous, still uncertain, but now, for the first time, I felt a flicker of genuine hope. We had the ammunition. Now it was time to pull the trigger. The air in Brooklyn still hummed with the residual energy of Marcus's digital conquest, but my mind was already miles away, planning the next move. The encrypted USB drive felt heavy in my bag, a potent weapon but a blunt one. Arthur was a master of deflection, and raw data, while damning, could be spun. I needed a more personal touch, a whisper of doubt that would fester. That's when the idea struck, sharp and clear as a bell. Victoria. Arthur's wife. Or more accurately, his soon-to-be ex-wife. Their split had been messy, public, and fueled by Arthur's usual brand of ruthless ambition. She'd been on the fringes of my life for years, a ghost at family events, always impeccably dressed, always with that guarded look in her eyes. She was the perfect audience for a carefully planted seed. The annual Sterling Foundation Gala was the perfect stage. It was the kind of event Arthur loved. All flashing cameras, champagne toasts, and the self-congratulatory air of the city's elite. It was also the kind of place Victoria would likely attend, if only to make a statement, or perhaps out of some lingering sense of obligation. I'd bought a ticket weeks ago, a small act of defiance I'd tucked away for a moment just like this. Walking into the ballroom felt like stepping onto a movie set. Chandeliers dripped with crystals, reflecting off the polished marble floors. The murmur of polite conversation and the clinking of glasses filled the air. I scanned the crowd, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I wasn't looking for Arthur, not yet. I was looking for Victoria. And there she was, a vision in emerald green, holding court near a display of abstract art. She looked older, of course, the years of dealing with Arthur having etched a certain weariness onto her features, but she still possessed that undeniable air of old money and quiet power. Taking a deep breath, I made my way towards her, feigning a slight stumble as I approached. "Oh, excuse me," I said, my voice pitched just right, apologetic, a little flustered. "I didn't see you there." Victoria turned, her eyes, a cool, assessing blue, met mine. There was a flicker of recognition, then polite indifference. "It's quite all right," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "It's just this crowd," I continued, gesturing vaguely. So easy to get lost. I'm Eleanor, by the way. Eleanor Vance. I offered a small, hesitant smile. Her eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly. The Vance name still carried weight, even if Sterling Industries had overshadowed it for years. Victoria Sterling, she replied, a hint of something I couldn't quite place. Curiosity? Wariness? In her tone. I know, I said, my voice dropping slightly. I've admired you from afar for a long time. You always seem to handle things with such grace. Especially given everything. I let the implication hang in the air, a subtle nod to her strained marriage. She gave a tight, almost imperceptible smile. One does what one must. Exactly, I agreed, leaning in just a fraction. It's just, sometimes you see people and you just know they're not what they seem. You see the polished exterior, the charm, but underneath. I let my gaze drift towards where Arthur was holding court across the room, surrounded by sycophants. Underneath, it's a different story entirely, isn't it? Victoria's eyes followed mine, and for a fleeting moment, I saw it. A flash of shared understanding, a flicker of resentment that mirrored my own. It was a tiny crack, but it was enough. Some stories, she said, her voice barely audible above the din, are best left untold. Or perhaps, I countered softly, they're just waiting for the right person to tell them. Someone who's seen the truth behind the facade. I met her gaze directly, letting her see the fire that burned beneath my quiet exterior. Someone who understands the cost of playing pretend. She held my gaze for a beat longer, then turned away, a subtle shift in her posture. Enjoy your evening, Eleanor. It wasn't an alliance, not yet. But it was a start. Seed planted. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that Victoria Sterling would be listening. The air in Manhattan still buzzed with the afterglow of the gala, but my focus had already shifted. Victoria was a gamble, a long shot, but I felt a tremor of something real in her eyes, a shared weariness with Arthur's whole charade. The seed was planted. Now I had to let it grow, and that meant returning to the battlefield. Sterling Industries. It had been a few days since the charity event. I'd been back at my desk, playing the part of the diligent, quiet assistant. Arthur hadn't said a word about the gala, hadn't acknowledged my presence there, which was typical. He preferred to pretend things didn't happen if they didn't directly serve his narrative. But I could feel it, a subtle shift in his demeanor. He was watching me. Not with suspicion, not yet, but with a flicker of something more intense. He'd always seen me as a simple cog in his machine, easily replaceable, easily dismissed. But the way I'd held myself at the gala, the brief, pointed conversation with Victoria, it had registered. He was starting to wonder if the mouse had teeth. Today, that curiosity morphed into something more. Arthur called me into his office, the sprawling corner suite that always smelled faintly of expensive cologne and desperation. He was leaning back in his ridiculously oversized leather chair, a smug smile playing on his lips. The usual mask of charm was firmly in place, but his eyes, usually so dismissive, held a sharp, calculating glint. "Eleanor," he began, his voice smooth as polished chrome. "I've been reviewing your performance metrics. Impressive, really, for someone in your position." He let the words hang, a deliberate jab. He knew I was smart, he just couldn't fathom smart or. "You've handled the usual tasks with unexpected efficiency." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my expression neutral, a practiced blankness. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling." He steepled his fingers, his gaze never leaving mine. "However, I've been thinking. It's time you stepped up. I have a project, a rather complex one that requires a delicate touch. Something that requires someone with discretion." He paused, letting the implied compliment sink in, a trap disguised as an opportunity. "It's a complete overhaul of the Sterling Foundation's annual donor database. We're talking years of archived data, inconsistent formatting, missing information. Real mess. It needs to be streamlined, cross-referenced, and ready for a complete relaunch before the end of the quarter. It's a massive undertaking, Eleanor. Most people would shy away from it. But I believe you're up to the challenge. He pushed a thick stack of files across his desk. They looked ancient, filled with handwritten notes and faded printouts. This wasn't a task. It was a deliberate attempt to bury me. It was designed to be overwhelming, impossible, a public display of my supposed inadequacy. He wanted me to drown in the minutiae, to fail spectacularly, and to have it all documented. He wanted to humiliate me again, but this time with a project that was too big, too messy for anyone to truly conquer. He was setting me up to crash and burn, and he expected me to thank him for the opportunity. The sheer audacity of it was almost breathtaking. But as I looked at the mountain of paper, a different feeling began to stir beneath the fear. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a cold, hard resolve. He thought he was giving me a task to break me. He had no idea he was handing me the tools to build my victory. This was his mistake. The stack of files Arthur dumped on my desk felt like a physical weight, a monument to his contempt. Years of Sterling Foundation donor records, a chaotic mess of faded paper, scribbled notes, and digital ghosts. He wanted me buried, to drown in the sheer volume of it, to fail so spectacularly that he could finally justify tossing me out like yesterday's trash. He thought he was handing me a tombstone. He had no idea he was giving me the blueprint. "This is a huge job, Eleanor," Arthur had said, that smug smile plastered on his face. "Most people would shy away from it." He'd leaned back, enjoying the show, expecting to see me crumble. But as I looked at the mountain of paper, something shifted inside me. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was being pushed aside by a fierce, burning resolve. He wanted me to fail. I'd succeed so hard it would break him. That night, I was at Marcus's loft in Brooklyn. The air hummed with the glow of monitors, a stark contrast to the musty smell of Arthur's office. I dumped the files on his workbench. "He wants me to drown in this," I told him, my voice tight. "He thinks this is how he'll get rid of me." Marcus, ever the calm in my storm, just nodded, his fingers already flying across his keyboard. "He underestimates you, Eleanor. He always has." He looked at the files, then back at me. "This is a disaster. But for you it's a goldmine. We worked like a well-oiled machine." Marcus, with his genius for code and systems, was the engine. I was the driver, the one who knew the terrain, who understood Arthur's blind spots. While he tackled the digital restoration, I dug into the paper trail, cross-referencing names, dates, and amounts. It was grueling work. Long nights bled into early mornings. Coffee became my best friend. The Vance estate felt a million miles away, but the antique silver locket I wore beneath my shirt was a constant reminder of what I was fighting for. We found it buried deep within the archaic spreadsheets and forgotten ledgers. Pattern. A series of shell corporations, cleverly disguised, funneling money away from the foundation's intended beneficiaries. It wasn't just sloppy record-keeping. It was deliberate, calculated fraud. Arthur had been siphoning funds for years, using the foundation as his personal piggy bank. The sheer audacity of it made my blood run cold. "He's been skimming for at least 7 years, maybe more," Marcus said. His voice hushed as he pulled up a complex web of transactions on his screen. "He's been hiding it behind layers of shell companies, but the money always traces back to accounts he controls." I stared at the glowing lines, the interconnected dots forming a picture of Arthur's greed. He thought he was setting a trap for me, but he'd walked right into his own. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, and what he'd stolen from so many others. He wanted to humiliate me with a task. He had no idea I was about to humiliate him on a scale he couldn't even imagine. The weight of the files was gone, replaced by the exhilarating, terrifying power of truth. Arthur Sterling's carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. The adrenaline from uncovering Arthur's fraud was still coursing through me, a potent mix of triumph and dread. Marcus and I had spent days poring over the data, piecing together the intricate web of his deception. It felt like holding a lit fuse, waiting for the right moment to strike. But we needed more. We needed to know his movements, his vulnerabilities, his next move. The Vance estate felt like a distant dream, a place of quiet elegance I longed to return to, but Manhattan was the battleground. I was back at Sterling Industries, the fluorescent lights of the office feeling harsher than usual, the air thick with unspoken tension. Arthur was more on edge than I'd ever seen him, his usual smooth facade cracking at the edges. He paced his office like a caged animal, barking orders into his phone. I kept my head down, playing the part of the invisible assistant, but my senses were on high alert. Every flicker of his eye, every sharp word, was data I was collecting. It was late, the office mostly empty except for a few stragglers. I was gathering my things, the worn leather-bound journal tucked securely in my bag, when Brenda Jenkins, Arthur's long-suffering assistant, brushed past me. She was a woman who'd seen too much, her eyes holding a permanent weariness that mirrored my own, though for different reasons. She paused for a fraction of a second, her hand hovering near my arm, then continued towards the elevators. As she walked away, I felt something small and folded being pressed into my palm. My heart leaped. I didn't look down, just closed my fingers around it, a tiny folded piece of paper. I waited until I was in the deserted stairwell, the echoing silence amplifying my own ragged breath, before unfolding it. It was a simple note, written in Brenda's neat, precise handwriting, but the message was anything but simple. No greeting, no farewell. Just a series of numbers and letters, a code I recognized instantly from Marcus's lessons. A. Travels May 14 to 16. Grand Hyatt. Room 3B. Urgent. Mia. Miami. Arthur was flying to Miami, and he had a crucial meeting. Grand Hyatt, Conference Room 3B. This was it. This was the opening I'd been waiting for. Brenda, in her own quiet way, was throwing me a lifeline. She knew. She must have seen enough, heard enough to understand what Arthur was capable of, and perhaps, just perhaps, she saw a chance for things to change. The note felt warm in my hand, a tangible piece of intel. It was a gamble for her, a huge risk. If Arthur found out, she'd be finished. But she'd done it anyway. It wasn't just about her own misery anymore. It was about helping someone else fight back. That was a kind of courage I understood. I practically flew back to Marcus's loft. The city lights blurred outside the cab window as my mind raced. Miami. Conference room. This was the perfect opportunity to get him out of his element, away from his usual defenses. Marcus was already there, the glow of his monitors illuminating his focused expression. I held out the crumpled note. "Brenda," I whispered, my voice tight with a mix of excitement and apprehension. She gave me this. Marcus took the note, his brow furrowing as he deciphered the code. His fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up flight manifests, hotel bookings, cross-referencing everything. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying speed. "He's leaving Tuesday morning," Marcus confirmed, his voice low. "Meeting scheduled for Wednesday afternoon. This is huge, Eleanor. This is our chance to get him when he's exposed." The weight of the information settled on me, heavy and exhilarating. Arthur Sterling, the man who had tormented me for years, was about to walk right into a trap of his own making, and I was the one setting the bait. The adrenaline was still buzzing, but a new kind of tension was building. Miami. Wednesday afternoon. Grand Hyatt, Conference Room 3B. It was a golden ticket, a chance to catch Arthur with his guard down, far from his usual stomping grounds. But I couldn't just walk into that meeting. I needed an ally on the inside, someone who could confirm what I suspected, someone who could lend weight to my accusations. David Chin. He was a senior board member, old school, respected, and, from what I'd gathered, someone who valued integrity. Arthur probably thought he had Chen in his pocket just like everyone else. That was his blind spot. He saw people as easily manipulated. I decided to play the innocent assistant, the one seeking guidance. I scheduled a meeting with David for Monday morning, right at Sterling Industries. The towering building felt different now. It wasn't just Arthur's kingdom. It was a battleground, and I was preparing my first strategic strike. The air in the executive suite was always thick with the smell of expensive cologne and stale ambition, but today it felt charged like the moments before a storm breaks. David's office was a stark contrast to Arthur's gaudy display. Rich, dark wood paneling, leather chairs that looked like they'd seen decades of serious business, and a view of Central Park that was more serene than imposing. He greeted me with a polite, if slightly distant, smile. "Eleanor, Arthur mentioned you might want to chat. Career advice, is it?" "Yes, Mr. Chen," I said, my voice carefully pitched to sound earnest and a little overwhelmed. I sat down, making sure my posture conveyed respect, not deference. "I've been with Sterling Industries for a while now, and I'm starting to think about my future. I admire your long tenure on the board, and I was hoping you could offer some perspective." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Of course. What's on your mind?" This was the tricky part. I couldn't accuse Arthur directly. Not yet. I had to plant seeds, let him connect the dots himself. It's just, sometimes I feel like there's a disconnect between what we're supposed to stand for as a company and, well, some of the decisions that get made. I've seen things, Mr. Chen, that make me question the ethical compass of certain leadership. It's hard to reconcile. I watched his eyes. They narrowed just a fraction. He was listening. "Ethical compass," he repeated, his tone neutral. "Yes, sir," I continued, my gaze steady. "For instance, the way certain projects are fast-tracked, or how funds seem to disappear into obscure accounts. It's concerning when you're trying to do good work, but you suspect impropriety. I'm not sure if I'm just naive, or if there's something more going on." I let my voice trail off, making it seem like I was wrestling with my own doubts. David was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the park outside. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken thoughts. He finally turned back to me, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Sterling Industries has a long history, Eleanor. And history is rarely clean. But impropriety, that's a strong word." He paused. "What kind of impropriety are we talking about?" I offered a small, hesitant smile. "I wouldn't want to speculate, Mr. I'm just an assistant, but I believe in transparency. And I believe the board should be aware of any potential irregularities, especially when they could impact the company's reputation." I let that hang in the air. The seed was planted. Now I just had to wait for it to grow. The seed was planted. Now the waiting game. David Chen's thoughtful silence in his office felt like a victory in itself. He hadn't dismissed me, hadn't outright believed me, but he'd listened. And that was more than I'd ever gotten from Arthur. I left Sterling Industries feeling a strange mix of relief and gnawing anxiety. The planted doubt was a fragile thing, easily crushed by Arthur's practiced charm. Back at Marcus's loft, the city lights of Brooklyn seemed a million miles away from the polished, cutthroat world of Manhattan. The air in his apartment was always cleaner, the silence less oppressive. Marcus was hunched over his monitors, the glow reflecting in his glasses. He looked up as I walked in, a question in his eyes. "Anything?" he asked, his voice low. I shook my head, sinking onto the worn couch. He listened. "Think he's thinking. But it's a long shot, Marcus. Arthur's got everyone fooled." Marcus nodded, his fingers still dancing across his keyboard. "That's why we need more. Something undeniable. Something he can't spin his way out of." He paused, then turned to me, a glint in his eye. "I've been working on something. Electronic eavesdropper." My brow furrowed. "What kind of eavesdropper?" "A camera," he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Discreet. Tinny. Arthur's office. Can get it in. Right now his office is the jackpot. He's been so sloppy lately, so arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable. My stomach did a flip. Arthur's office. The place where he'd humiliated me, belittled me, chipped away at my spirit for 5 years. The thought of seeing him, of catching him in the act of whatever shady dealings he was up to, sent a jolt of pure, raw adrenaline through me. It was a dangerous idea, but the potential payoff was immense. How? I breathed, leaning forward. How do we get it in there? Brenda, Marcus said, his grin widening. She's our inside woman, remember? She's been complaining about him leaving his office door unlocked when he takes his power naps. I've got a way to get it past security without anyone noticing. It'll be disguised as a new USB charger, something he'd just plug in and forget about. He tapped a key, and a schematic of a sleek black device appeared on one of his screens. It looked innocent enough, just a small power adapter. It'll transmit directly to a secure server. We'll have eyes and ears on him 24/7. The idea was audacious, terrifying, and exactly what we needed. The thought of Arthur's smug face caught on camera, his unethical practices laid bare, was incredibly satisfying. Felt like the final piece of the puzzle. The note from Brenda, the conversation with David, and now this. We were building an undeniable case, brick by digital brick. When? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Tonight, Marcus said. His eyes locked on the screen. After everyone's gone home. I'll go in. It'll take maybe 15 minutes. You'll have access to the feed by morning. That night sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned, picturing Arthur's office, the plush carpet, the mahogany desk, the expensive art on the walls. All of it a facade for the rot beneath. I imagined Marcus, a shadow in the sterile halls of Sterling Industries, planting the tiny camera, a silent witness to Arthur's downfall. The weight of what we were doing pressed down on me, but beneath it was a fierce, burning determination. This was it. The beginning of the end for Arthur Sterling. The anticipation was a physical ache, a coiled spring ready to unleash. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this camera would capture the proof we needed. It was the final nail in his coffin, waiting to be hammered in. The Sterling Industries executive boardroom. It felt like stepping into a lion's den, but I wasn't a lamb anymore. I was the hunter, and I had my prey cornered. The air was thick with that usual mix of expensive air freshener and underlying tension. David, Victoria, and the rest of the board members were already seated, their faces a mixture of professional curiosity and polite boredom. Arthur, of course, was at the head of the table. His usual smug smile plastered on his face, like he owned the place. Which technically he thought he did. I walked in, Marcus a silent shadow a few steps behind me, carrying a sleek briefcase. My heart hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation. This was it. Years of swallowing insults, of biting my tongue, of planning in the quiet corners of Marcus's loft. It all came down to this moment. I wore a simple, sharp suit, nothing flashy, but it felt like armor. Good afternoon, everyone, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the frantic energy buzzing under my skin. Arthur's eyes flicked towards me, a flicker of surprise, quickly masked by that practiced indifference. He probably thought I was here to fetch coffee or file some last-minute report. Eleanor, Arthur drawled, his tone dripping with condescension. What are you doing here? This isn't your usual department. I ignored him, walking to the center of the room, placing the briefcase on the polished table. I'm here today not as an assistant, but as a representative of a significant investment opportunity for Sterling Industries. A ripple of murmurs went through the room. David Chen looked intrigued, his brow furrowed in thought. Victoria's gaze was sharp, a hint of something I couldn't quite place. Maybe recognition, maybe hope. An investment opportunity. Arthur scoffed, leaning back in his chair. And what would you know about investment opportunities, Eleanor? More than you might think, Arthur, I replied, meeting his gaze directly. The years of humiliation flashed through my mind, but they no longer stung. They fueled me. I opened the briefcase. Inside, nestled on velvet lining, wasn't just one item, but several. First, I pulled out a thick, formal business proposal. It was meticulously crafted, outlining a strategic acquisition that would not only diversify Sterling Industries' portfolio but also, crucially, highlight and correct the very financial discrepancies I'd uncovered. This proposal details a plan to acquire a controlling stake in a biotech firm, Novogen, I explained, my voice clear and strong. It's a sound investment with incredible growth potential. However, I paused, letting the word hang in the air. This acquisition requires a full audit of Sterling Industries' current financial standing to ensure seamless integration and compliance. I then produced the worn leather-bound journal. It wasn't just a diary. It was a ledger of Arthur's illicit dealings, meticulously documented by his own hand during moments of drunken arrogance. I opened it to a page detailing a shell corporation and a series of questionable offshore transfers. This journal, Arthur's personal record, details a pattern of financial misconduct, including the creation of shell companies and the diversion of company funds for personal gain. Arthur's face had gone pale. His eyes darted between the journal and me, a desperate panic starting to surface. And to corroborate these entries, I continued, my voice unwavering, we have the video evidence. I reached into the briefcase and pulled out a small, discreet surveillance camera. It was the one Marcus had planted. This device, placed in your private office, Arthur, captured you discussing these very transactions, confirming the details outlined in your journal and the financial irregularities I flagged. I didn't need to play the footage. The implication was enough. The room was silent, the only sound the frantic beating of my own heart. David Chen's face was grim, his earlier curiosity replaced by a dawning realization. Victoria watched Arthur, her expression unreadable, but her posture spoke volumes. He was trapped. The carefully constructed world he'd built on lies and manipulation was crumbling around him, and I was the one holding the hammer. This was no longer about revenge. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, and ensuring he paid for every single day he'd made me feel worthless. The power in the room had shifted, irrevocably. The air in the Sterling Industries executive boardroom was thick, heavier than usual. It always felt like a pressure cooker in here, but today it was suffocating. Arthur sat at the head of the table, his usual smirk in place, but I could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. David and Victoria were there, their faces unreadable, and the rest of the board members were a sea of polite, expectant faces. Marcus stood a few feet behind me, a silent, steady presence. My heart was doing a frantic salsa against my ribs, but my voice, when I spoke, was surprisingly calm. "Good afternoon, everyone," I began, my gaze sweeping across the room. Arthur's eyes narrowed, that smirk faltering for a split second. He clearly wasn't expecting me, not here, not like this. He probably thought I was just the errand girl, here to fetch his coffee or file some last-minute report. "Eleanor," Arthur drawled, his voice dripping with that fake, condescending charm he used like a weapon. "What are you doing here? This isn't exactly your usual department." I ignored him, walking to the polished mahogany table and placing the sleek briefcase I'd carried in front of me. "I'm here today," I announced, my voice ringing with a newfound authority, "not as an assistant, but as a representative of a significant investment opportunity for Sterling Industries." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. David Chen leaned forward, his brow furrowed in genuine curiosity. Victoria's sharp gaze met mine, a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Maybe recognition, maybe a silent acknowledgement. Arthur let out a dismissive scoff, leaning back in his chair. "An investment opportunity. And what would you know about investment opportunities, Eleanor?" This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for, planning for, dreaming about. The years of being belittled, of having my ideas stolen, of being treated like dirt. It all coalesced into this single powerful point. "More than you might think, Arthur," I replied, meeting his gaze directly. The humiliation of the past 5 years flashed through my mind, but it no longer stung. Fueled me. I opened the briefcase. Inside, nestled on dark velvet, were the pieces of Arthur's downfall. First, I pulled out a thick, formal business proposal. This proposal details a plan to acquire a controlling stake in a biotech firm, Novogen, I explained, my voice clear and strong. It's a sound investment with incredible growth potential. However, I paused, letting the word hang in the air. This acquisition requires a full audit of Sterling Industries' current financial standing to ensure seamless integration and compliance. Then, I produced the worn leather-bound journal. It wasn't just a diary. It was a ledger of Arthur's dirty secrets, documented by his own hand during moments of drunken arrogance. I opened it to a page detailing a shell corporation and a series of questionable offshore transfers. This journal, Arthur's personal record, I continued, my voice unwavering, details a pattern of financial misconduct, including the creation of shell companies and the diversion of company funds for personal gain. Arthur's face had gone chalk white. His eyes darted between the journal and me, a desperate panic starting to surface. He was trapped. And to corroborate these entries, I said, reaching into the briefcase and pulling out the small, discreet surveillance camera Marcus had planted, we have the video evidence. I held it up. This device, placed in your private office, Arthur, captured you discussing these very transactions, confirming the details outlined in your journal and the financial irregularities I flagged. I didn't need to play the footage. The implication was enough. The room was silent, the only sound the frantic beating of my own heart. David Chen's face was grim, his earlier curiosity replaced by a dawning, damning realization. Victoria watched Arthur, her expression unreadable, but her posture spoke volumes. He was cornered. The carefully constructed world he'd built on lies and manipulation was crumbling around him, and I was the one holding the hammer. This was no longer about revenge. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, and ensuring he paid for every single day he'd made me feel worthless. The power in the room had shifted, irrevocably. Arthur's face, moments before a mask of smug confidence, contorted into something ugly. It was a primal snarl, a cornered animal lashing out. The color drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly white. His eyes darting wildly around the room as if searching for an escape route that wasn't there. The silence that had descended was heavy, suffocating, and he was desperate to break it. "This is insane," he finally spat, his voice cracking, the polished veneer completely gone. You little schemer. This is all fabricated. A lie." He pointed a trembling finger at me, then at the journal. "That's my personal journal. It's private. You had no right to go through it." I held his gaze, my own steady, unyielding. The years of his abuse, of his casual cruelty, had hardened me. "Private, Arthur. When it details how you've been stealing from this company, from its shareholders, from its employees, from people like me, who you've treated like dirt for 5 years." My voice was low, dangerous. "That journal is Exhibit A, Arthur. Your own words damning you." David shifted in his seat, his eyes fixed on Arthur. He looked disgusted and frankly a little scared. Victoria, however, remained impassive, her gaze sharp, watching the implosion with a chilling detachment. Arthur scoffed, a wet, ragged sound. "You think some old diary proves anything? Anyone could have written that. And that camera. Probably planted by some rival trying to frame me." He was grasping at straws, his desperation palpable. He looked at Brenda, who was standing near the door, her face pale. "Brenda, you know me. You know I'm a good man. Tell them." Brenda flinched, her eyes wide with fear, but she didn't look away from me. She shook her head, a barely perceptible movement. I'd given her a way out, a chance to finally breathe. She'd taken it. "Brenda's not your puppet anymore, Arthur," I said softly, my eyes still locked on his. "She knows the truth. Just like David is starting to see it. Just like Victoria, who's probably known about your little games for years." Arthur's head snapped towards Victoria. "You knew?" he demanded, his voice laced with betrayal. Victoria gave a small, tight smile. "I'm not blind, Arthur. And I'm certainly not stupid." That was it. The last thread of his composure snapped. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. It scraped loudly across the floor, a jarring sound in the tense silence. "This is a witch hunt," he roared, his face flushed. "Eleanor Vance, you're nothing but a spoiled brat trying to get attention. You think you can just waltz in here and take over? You have no idea what you're doing." "Actually, Arthur," I countered, my voice calm, cutting through his tirade. "I have a very good idea. The proposal for Novagene is solid. It's a smart move for Sterling Industries. A move that would have been even smoother if the company's books weren't, shall we say, creatively managed by you." I gestured to the business proposal. "This is the future. A future that doesn't include you." Marcus stepped forward, his presence a quiet force. He held up Arthur Sterling's personal tablet. "And this," Marcus said, his voice even, "contains the digital trail. Encrypted emails, offshore account transfers, the whole 9 yards. All backed up. All verified." Arthur stared at the tablet, his jaw working silently. The fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a hollow dread. He looked at each of us, his eyes filled with a venomous mix of hatred and disbelief. He saw David's grim face, Victoria's cold stare, Brenda's averted gaze, Marcus's quiet competence, and my own unshakable resolve. He was utterly alone. You'll regret this," he finally whispered, the threat barely audible, devoid of its former power. I picked up the worn leather-bound journal, closing it with a soft thud. "I've regretted a lot of things, Arthur. But this is the opposite of regret. This is finally setting things right." The air in the room felt lighter, cleaner, as if a long-overdue storm had finally broken. The power had shifted irrevocably. The reign of Arthur Sterling was over. The silence in the Sterling Industries executive boardroom stretched, thick and heavy, after Arthur's pathetic outburst. It wasn't the kind of silence that meant people were thinking. It was the kind that meant everything had just crashed down. Arthur stood there, his face a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated fear, looking like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar, except the cookies were millions of dollars. He'd finally run out of road. I watched him, a strange mix of emotions churning inside me. There was the satisfaction, of course, sharp and sweet. 5 years of swallowing his venom, of biting my tongue until it bled, of being treated like dirt. It all culminated in this moment. But beneath that, there was a weariness. This whole thing, this elaborate dance of expose and revenge, had taken a toll. It had demanded so much, twisted my insides into knots, and forced me to become someone I wasn't sure I recognized. David, bless his pragmatic heart, was the first to break the spell. He cleared his throat, his voice low and steady. "Arthur," he began, and the way he said his name, it was like a final nail in a coffin. "This is a lot to process. The evidence presented is substantial." He didn't look at me, but his gaze was fixed on Arthur, a grim finality in his eyes. He was done with Arthur's games. Victoria, ever the picture of cool composure, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Her eyes met mine for a fleeting second, and in that glance, I saw a flicker of something akin to respect. Or maybe it was just relief that she wouldn't have to deal with Arthur's mess anymore. She'd always been on the outside looking in, a queen in a crumbling castle, and now the castle was truly falling. Marcus, my rock through all of this, stood a little straighter, his gaze unwavering on Arthur. He'd been the silent architect of much of this, the one who'd made the impossible possible. Without him, none of this would have happened. He was more than just a tech whiz. He was family in a way that mattered more than blood. Arthur finally seemed to snap out of his stupor. He looked at Brenda, his eyes pleading, desperate. "Brenda, tell them this is all a lie." Brenda, however, just stood there, her face pale but resolute. She'd already made her choice in that boardroom, a silent act of defiance that spoke volumes. She looked away from Arthur, her gaze finding mine for a moment, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. She was free. The air in the room began to shift. The suffocating pressure Arthur had always exuded was dissipating, replaced by a different kind of energy. It was the hum of change, the quiet buzz of a new beginning. The power dynamics had been flipped, not with a bang, but with a series of carefully placed truths. Later, much later, after the police had been called, after the initial chaos had subsided, I found myself standing on the manicured grounds of the Vance estate. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a stark contrast to the sterile gray of the boardroom. The sprawling mansion loomed before me, a silent testament to generations of my family. It felt both foreign and deeply familiar. This place, this legacy, had been Arthur's blind spot. He'd seen me as just Eleanor Vance, the quiet assistant, never suspecting the true depth of my roots, the power that flowed through my veins. He'd underestimated me, just as he'd underestimated everyone who wasn't him. I walked towards the house, the worn leather-bound journal tucked safely in my bag. It was a symbol of Arthur's downfall, but also a reminder of the darkness that can exist, even in the most polished of packages. Beside it, I carried my mother's antique silver locket, a tangible piece of my past, a reminder of who I was and where I came from. The weight of it all settled on me. The responsibility, the inheritance, the future. It wasn't just about taking down Arthur anymore. It was about rebuilding, about honoring the legacy he'd tried to tarnish. It was about proving that strength wasn't about cruelty, and that true power came from integrity. I opened the heavy oak door, the scent of old wood and polish filling my senses. The house was quiet, waiting. Felt like stepping into a different lifetime, a different me. The years of enduring Arthur's abuse, of planning my revenge, had been a crucible. I had emerged from it, not unscathed, but undeniably stronger. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Sterling Industries was still a behemoth, and Arthur's ruin would leave a void. But I had Marcus, David, and even Victoria in her own way. I had the knowledge, the resources, and the unwavering resolve forged in the fires of betrayal. As I stepped into the grand foyer, the last rays of sunlight illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, I knew one thing for sure. Arthur Sterling's reign was over, and mine was just beginning. The game was won, but the real work, the work of building something better, was about to start. I was no longer just Eleanor Vance, the overlooked assistant. I was Eleanor Vance, the heir, the victor, ready to reclaim my destiny. That's it. If you liked this video, share it with your friends and leave your like. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss more videos like this. Leave your comments saying what you thought of the video and what you would like to see in the next videos. Remembering that we have other videos in this style that you will like to watch, just enter our channel that I guarantee you will like. Until the next video.